Hello, and thank you for logging on to the podcast for the Foundation for Physician Advancement, a nonprofit built by and run by physicians to help other physicians prepare for practicing in today's healthcare environment. I'm Marney Reid, the Executive Director, and we are looking forward to a great discussion today. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for our podcast today. My name is Marney Reid, Executive Director of Foundation for Physician Advancement. And on today's podcast, we're going into detail about how to get an interview and things to consider during this process. Take almost everything you know and apply during residency and fellowship and forget about it for this segment, as you will later hear from Dr. Michael Ast. And our faculty today are going to share some of their advice on how to prepare, execute, and stand up in your job search interviews. So joining us again is Dr. Michael Ast, Brian Culp, and Ryan Nunley, who went from interviewee to interviewers over the course of their career. Gentlemen, please introduce yourself and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Marney. I'm Mike Ast from HSS. I work in an academic setting, and I started my career 10 years ago in a private practice setting and made a switch about 5 years in. I work now in a large academic health system in the Northeast.
Yeah, thanks. And my name is Brian Culp. I am in true private practice in New Jersey, and I've been in private practice the entirety of my career.
Thanks, Marney, and welcome to my other colleagues here. This is Ryan Nunley. I'm at Washington University in St. Louis, a pure academic job, and I'm going to change it up that if I were graduating now and knowing what I know, I would absolutely go into private practice, own my own ASC, and understanding the business side of medicine, be able to, I think, really work for myself as a boss. But that being what it is, I am at an academic center and work for the big boss.
Well, let's get to some really good stuff, right? Because, I'm sure our attendees are looking forward to the interview and preparing for that. Would love to start with Dr. Ast. Irregardless of employment model, you said something that really resonated at a recent residence and fellows course that we did about the way that you prepare for your job interview is unlike any other way that a surgeon has prepared thus far. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And then can you go into some of the resources that you think people could and should use when looking for a job?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is one of the challenges we have as physicians, especially those of us who, like me, sort of went straight through. So I had jobs in high school and stuff. But once I got to college, I went college, med school, residency, fellowship, get a job. And the problem with that is that everything you've done before then has been the worst possible practice you can have for interviewing for a real job. Because when you get into medical school, you're just going anywhere, right? You'll go to any medical school in the world that will take you. And then orthopedic residency is competitive. And so when you show up at a residency, your job is to convince that residency that you're the right person for them. And you don't care what they need to hear. You don't care what you have to say. You're going to say anything. So if they're a big academic place, you talk about how much you want to do research. And if they're a community practice, you talk about how you just want to train at a community practice to learn to operate and take care of people. And you're sort of just at no point, to kind of what we've heard from other people before, is that at no point are you actually looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, like, what do I want? And so when you go to your real job interviews, you finished fellowship and now you're out looking for a real job, or maybe you went straight from residency. It's the first time for many of us in a really long time they've actually interviewed for a job where what you think actually matters. And you're not just trying to convince the person on the other side of the table that they should like you. You're actually trying to find out if you like them. And if the job that you're looking at is really going to make you happy. Is it going to have the qualities in it that you're looking for? Is it going to provide you with the opportunities that you're looking for? And the real thing you have to do in order to figure that out is you got to practice. You just have to practice. And because this is a skill like any other skill, you need to learn what type of questions people are going to ask you. And you need to learn what type of questions you want to ask, or learn what information you need to know in order to make the right decision for yourself and for potentially your family, significant other, or anyone else. And so whether that's doing mock interviews with friends, colleagues, mentors, or even just going on a bunch of interviews, potentially even with jobs that you may not necessarily think you're interested in, to learn about them, to learn more about the different practice models. If you grew up only in an academic setting, only teaching residents and fellows, you probably don't know much about private practice. So go interview at a couple of private practices, take some time, learn the language of interviewing, and then learn the skill of interviewing. And a lot of times what happens is you leave your first or second interview like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what just happened. Like, do they like me or not? Like, because that's how we all left our residency and fellowship interviews, when it really doesn't matter. You're going there to find out information for yourself so you can make a good decision. So like everything else, it's all about practice.
Such great feedback. And Dr. Culp, can you share with us some resources that you would suggest for the residents and fellows out there that are looking for a job?
Sure. I mean, I think certainly starting with your mentors, whether that's your folks in residency, or for me, that was waiting till I was in fellowship and talking to the fellowship mentors about the places I was interested in. That was a big resource for me. My wife was a big resource. And as Mike said, you better make sure your spouse is happy. So she kind of said, here's the 5 general parts of the country you're allowed to look. So it really narrowed that down and created the funnel a little bit for me. So that was very helpful. And then when I had that funnel, I started calling on everybody I could think of. Like I'm from Central Ohio and Columbus, so I called my Smith and Nephew rep from New Jersey and said, "Do you know any Smith and Nephew reps in Columbus?" And I did the same thing with my DePuy rep and my Zimmer rep. I called, people who were prior residents and fellows and who were in the area, and I said, "Do you know anything about the group?" Sometimes you can also gain a little bit of information about one group in the area if you're interviewing with multiple groups in the area. So, you're kind of looking for every bit of information you can to make sure that where you ultimately settle is the one right for you, so you're not one of the 50% leaving.
Great advice. And Dr. Nunley, you have sat across the table for many an interview specifically to looking to hire, for your department. What are the types of questions that you could be asking that our audience could prepare with?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the points that have been made, one is being prepared. Nothing more frustrating, whether it's a medical student, resident, a potential fellow applicant, or partner that doesn't have any idea about the area or the medical center or the facilities we have, the people that are there. If you're going to do your part, to the point that was made, your spouse needs to be involved. Everybody who's important in your life needs to be involved, because if they're not happy, one of the biggest triggers we've seen, and between our fellows to our partners, is that if your spouse doesn't really sign on or really enjoy the location or what the job entails, within 2 or 3 years, you're either looking at your spouse leaving you or you're leaving with your spouse. And that's happened. And so we're very cognizant when we bring the spouses in. I think they should be engaged. Second is there's a culture, and the Midwest is very different than it may be from New York and the East Coast or California and the West Coast. So there's a dynamic, I think, that plays into, do you get along with your partners? Do you have similar types of personalities, to mindsets, to just the geographic culture of things? And that can be tough. I never interviewed, applied at any point in my training to Mayo Clinic because I just didn't think that I could handle the cold and be isolated. I was single at the time. Whether it's the right or wrong decision, that's a personal decision, but you have to recognize the things that are important for you, as my colleagues have said. And so knowing that as you go into an interview, don't just agree to the interview because you think, oh, this is a cool place, or, it's a prestigious place, or, hey, I'm just giving it a test run, unless you're really, I guess, maybe using it from a practice standpoint to get to the point where you're going to your real interview. But, take a lot of time. This is the most important decision you've probably ever made. Your medical school training, you had some choices. Your residency, you had a rank list. You are 100% an independent contractor. There are no match procedures that require this. There's no limited number of schools you can apply to an interview. You take your time and find the right one that matches for you and your family.
Exceptional advice. Dr. Ast, before we start wrapping this up with our faculty's top tip of what to avoid doing on the interview trail, Dr. Ast, can you walk through the purpose of interview 1, 2, and 3, if there is one?
Yeah, I think that's the other thing about these interviews that are so unusual, is that it's not just a 10 minutes in a room with 5 people and you're going to figure out the rest of your life, right? Interviewing for a real job is a process. Generally, the first time you go down, it's just a meet and greet. Think of it as a first date. tell me a little bit about you. Let me tell you a little bit about me. It's just like that. And you don't need to get into a lot of details. You don't need to get into a lot of things. And exactly to what Ryan was just talking about, what you're trying to establish there is the culture. Does everyone seem happy? Do the people seem nice? Does this seem like a place you can go? You know, when I was interviewing for my first job, and Brian will understand this story because he's been there. I accidentally drove my wife. I wanted to show her the area, and I drove her to the wrong Capital Health Hospital. So there's one really beautiful one in a nice neighborhood, and there's one dead in the center of Trenton. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with Trenton, but this part of Trenton is just not a very nice part of Trenton. And that's where I took my wife because I just got myself lost. And so you need to know, where is the hospital? Is this a place you want to live? These kind of things are what you do on interview number one. If you like it, and if it passes all of those just general tests, you're generally going to come back again and meet with the partners or your other colleagues, potentially with your significant other and maybe their significant others. And if it's in a city or an academic setting, it might be we're all going to go out to dinner together and really get to talk. It might be at the academic offices. It might be at the private practice office or the country club or any number of other places where these happen. And that's when you can really start asking more detailed questions like, look, I think I like the people. I think I like the culture. This all seems to fit well. How much money does everyone make? What are you looking for out of me? What support am I going to get when I come here to build my practice? What support will I have in the office? What are the opportunities in the operating room for block time, for assistance, for this and that? How have the last couple, 3, 4, 5 people who've been brought in, how long did it take them to get busy? What type of practices do they have now? That's when you can really ask sort of the more detailed questions that are important for you to understand what your future would look like in this practice. The first interview is really just to understand, would you even be okay being in this practice? Is it, to Ryan's point, too cold there or too isolated somewhere else, or just the people don't seem to sort of vibe with your vibe? I think that's if you have to try to split them up, because one of the mistakes you can make is walk in the first 5 minutes and ask how much money you're going to make. Right? Like it's like these kind of things are ways to just not necessarily start off on the right foot, and also just aren't that important, even though we all think so, because we're finally hoping to make some money after being, relatively underpaid for the last, 7 to 10 years.
Absolutely. Okay, starting with Dr. Culp, Dr. Nunley, and then wrapping up with Dr. Ass. Top tip you advise people not to do in the interview process?
I think Mike said it, which was ask too early about the money. I think asking questions of people that are a little bit personal, which may be very relevant to you, but not necessarily doing it at the right time in the interview process, is probably a big foot in your mouth early in the interview game.
Yeah, I mean, I think talking about the money, there's different compensation scales and everybody's different. And I think you have to really have a true appreciation of how compensation scales work, because there's just so many different models that coming in just asking about the money is probably a turnoff. Similar thing, I think asking for time off or, how much call do I have to take? Coming in with that type of mentality makes me a little worried that this person is not going to be a team player. I mean, I think when I started out, if any of my partners said, hey, I've got this, I'd say, I'll take your call, or I'll take that case. I'll help unload it. So I think being the opposite, if you're the super go-getter, everybody wants to have you as a partner. They know that you're going to take great care of patients. You're going to step up to the, you're not going to leave stuff half done for them to have to clean up. So recognizing team sports or being a team player is relying on your partners, and that vice versa, that they can trust you and that they can have you as a junior partner come in and maybe carry a little bit more work that can free them up. I mean, that to me is a great junior partner who begs me to take extra call because they're not busy. They know they have the time, and they know that I don't have the time. Where I would never want to push that on my junior partner, but if they come up to me and ask me for it, that's really a meaningful process in the partnership of showing that they're committed to really being somebody who I can entrust my patients to and to have as a partner.
Great advice.
Yeah, and I think I'll wrap up. I know you said one thing, but I'm going to just sort of reiterate something Ryan said and then add something else. Number one is, don't be arrogant, right? And when we finish fellowship, we feel like kings and queens. We're the best. We're incredibly talented. We trained at this wonderful institution. And so we show up somewhere and we talk about how great we are. And we're going to do this new thing and that new thing. But you don't really know if that's what they want right away. And really what most practices are looking for is somebody to see patients in the office, take more call, do complicated cases, potentially bring a new specialty or niche or take over for somebody retiring. But like, don't just show up and say how wonderful you are. Make sure you take an opportunity to see what they're looking for. And that's what leads me back to something Ryan said earlier, which is the biggest mistake you can make is not doing your homework. Right? Understand the practice you're looking at. Know who the people are. Know their names. Know their specialties. Or are they generalists? How long have they been there? Have 10 people left recently? Doing your homework, and that involves talking to the people at the practice. Go on the website, read about it, talk to your mentors, friends, colleagues in the area, as Brian alluded to earlier, talking to the implant vendors and the companies who work in that area. Like, do your research so you know who you're talking to, so that you can understand, number one, is it a good fit for you? But number two, you can understand, do you really want to be the person that they are looking for, right? And to make sure that what you want and what they want really line up. I think those are kind of the big ones.
Well, that is a lot to distill for those of you who will be joining us in a few weeks for a live course. Please come with plenty of questions for a small table discussion session. And once again, if you are just now learning about Foundation for Physician Advancement, please visit our website at buildingasuccessfulpractice.org. Thank you again to our amazing faculty and to the listeners that took time out of your busy lives to really help prepare for that next step going into practice. We thank you as well. If you want to learn a little bit more about our mission and upcoming events, please visit us at buildingasuccessfulpractice.org.